Aaron is also one of the best and most beloved players of all time. And he's a legend in the MLB, Major League Baseball, and for the Braves, which is my favorite team. So it has a special place in my heart. Well, there's a story involving both of these two guys. Make sure they're up there. When they were playing against each other, their teams were, in the World Series one year. So Yogi Berra was known for just chattering away behind the plate nonstop. The man was just an incredible talker from all the stories that you hear. He would talk, he would joke nonstop, trying to distract the batter and trying to encourage, pep up his teammates. So as Hank Aaron is walking up to bat, Yogi Berra, as usual, cracks a joke. He says, "Henry," and that's Hank Aaron's real name, "Henry, you're holding the bat wrong." And remember, he's talking to one of the greatest baseball players of all time, one of the best batters of all time. "You're holding the bat wrong. You're supposed to hold it so you can read the trademark." Now, there's usually a trademark toward the top of a baseball bat, especially wooden ones, where so he's telling him to twist the bat in his hands, right, to where you can see the trademark. Well, Hank Aaron doesn't say anything in response to Yogi Berra. Instead, he hits the next pitch into the left field bleachers. And as he's walking around, he didn't twist the bat around, by the way. And as he's walking around or jogging around the bases, and after he tags up at home, he looks at Yogi Berra and he just says one very simple thing. He says, "I didn't come up here to read. Didn't come up here to look at the trademark." Yogi Berra, or Hank Aaron, was there for a purpose, right? He knew why he was in that batter's box. He had a mission to hit that ball into the left field bleachers. And he wasn't going to let anything distract him from that mission. We've been in John 17 studying what we're calling the closing prayer of Jesus, the closing prayer of his life, the longest prayer that we have from him. And so far, we're finishing tonight with the second section of that prayer. We have the first 5 verses where Jesus prays for himself, then verses 6 through 19 where he prays for his apostles, and then verses 20 through 26 where he prays for us, for his universal body of followers. Now, in the section where he's talking about his apostles, we have those 3 divisions. We have the platform, verse 6 through the first part of verse 11. Then we have protection, and tonight, purpose. Those 2 petitions that are built on top of the platform, protection and purpose. So tonight we're going to be in verses 17 through 19, talking about our purpose and the apostles' purpose. So read those verses with me, if you will. Beginning in verse 17 of John 17, "Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sake I consecrate myself, that they also may be sanctified in truth." Purpose. We're going to start, instead of starting with verse 17, which might make sense, we're starting with verse 18. We're going out of order. Mission, verse 18. Read it again with me, thinking about mission. "As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world." I'll read that again since that was incredibly distracting. "As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world." Now, this is the very essence of the apostles' task. Apostle. Now, this is the word translated sent. I've sent them into the world. Apostle, as you can see, apostello, apostle. The word apostle just means one who is sent. So when Jesus says, as you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world, this is the essence of their task. This is what they are all about. They are brought to Jesus to be sent away from Jesus on a mission. Now, because of that, we see this concept of being sent over and over again in their ministry while Jesus was on earth. It began with their original mission in Mark 3 and verse 14. He appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, sent ones, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach. He might apostello them out to preach. So it's in their original mission. It's in the special commission to the house of Israel. In Luke 9 and verse 2, he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. So, original mission, special commission, and then, finally, the Great Commission. John 20, verse 21, Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. As the Father apostelloed me, I am apostelloing you," right? I'm apostling you. He's sending them. So in many ways, this is what it was all about for the apostles. They were a sent people. They were on a mission in the world. And also in many ways, this is what it's all about for us. We are a sent people. So every generation takes up the task of the former generation. We're passing the baton generation by generation. That started with the apostles. We have the same task that the apostles had. They've been handing it down generation by generation, and it's gotten to us. Now, before it was the apostles' task, it was Jesus' task. Remember John 17:18, as you sent me into the world, so I have sent them. So at first it was Jesus' task. He was sent. Then he sent them, and now we've had that baton passed down to us through 2,000 years of history. And also, before it was even Jesus' task, this was prophesied for hundreds of years. Isaiah 49 and verse 6, God speaking to the nation of Israel, I will make you a light as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. Notice, this is about being sent. It's on a mission on the earth. It's about reaching the people who aren't God's people. So that's been the mission of God's people for as long as we can remember. The book of Acts is a historical account of what this looked like in the life of the early church. They were sent. They were going to the nations. Acts 8 and verse 4. Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. They're on a mission. They were sent. And then when we get to the epistles in the New Testament, Romans and the following books, those books tell us what this looks like in real life, what being sent looks like, or at least should look like in real life. It all centers around this concept of being sent, being on a mission. So the point that I'm trying to make is this. This is what it has always been about for God's people. As God sent Abraham, as he sent Moses, as he sent Elijah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the rest of the prophets, as he sent John the Baptist and Jesus and the apostles and Christians for 2,000 years now, so he sends us. This has always been the purpose of God's people. We don't exist for ourselves. We exist for everybody else. We're sent. That's our mission. Giacomo Puccini, it's this guy. I think I said that wrong, pretty sure. Giacomo Puccini. He was Italian. He was born in 1858. He's one of the greatest composers of music of all time. He was especially known for his operas. Well, Giacomo died in 1924 of cancer. And he died while he was working on his final composition, his masterpiece, the final great work of Giacomo Puccini. And they left it undone. But there was an Italian conductor named Arturo Toscanini, also butchered that for sure. But Mr. Arturo took up the work of Puccini, that final masterpiece. He carried it on and he completed it. And the final product was called Turandot. It's an opera that is still being performed today, a century later. The final work of Puccini, which was never completed during his lifetime, is still being performed today. So our master died and left this earth, leaving his people, his body here on earth, to carry on his task, right? Carry on his mission of taking his message to every single person on earth. That's our mission. That's why we're here. Then in verse 17, going out of order, going back to verse 17, we find the means of our mission. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. Now, I normally think about being sanctified as being purified, being cleansed, being refined. And that's definitely an aspect of this concept of sanctification. We see that several places in the New Testament, one of which is 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 3, where Paul says that this is the will of God, your sanctification. Then he goes on to say that don't do these certain things with your body. Be sanctified, be purified, be different. So the definition of sanctification that normally comes to my mind is being set apart. I'm sure you've heard that, right? Sanctified, we are set apart people. And that's definitely part of it. We're taken out of the world. We're set apart from it, called out of it. We're God's people now. That's part of being sanctified, being purified for his work. But there's also more to it. The word translated sanctify here in verse 17 is basically the same word as words translated consecrated and sanctified in verse 19 of John 17. And then also the word translated holy in verse 11, Holy Father, is basically the same word. Sanctify, consecrated, consecrate and sanctified in verses 17 and 19 are just the verb forms of the adjective holy in verse 11. So they're all basically the same word. They come from the same group, the same family of words. They all have the same basic meaning. We could translate this phrase in verse 17, make them holy in your truth. Make them holy in your truth. That's what sanctify means. Now, as we think about holiness, at its most basic, the word holy is a descriptor of God. Over and over and over again in the Bible, he is called holy. He is transcendent, right? He's separate. He's different. He's other. He's far away from us. He's holy. That's why we have passages like Revelation 4 in verse 8, which says that day and night they never cease to say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. More than any other word in the Bible, God is called holy. Both the Old Testament and the New Testament. In both Testaments, the word holy is used to describe God more than anything else. He is the separate one. He is completely holy. Now, because of that, people and things that are set apart to be used by God are referred to as holy things, sanctified, consecrated things. One example of this is number 16 and verse 38. As for the censers of these men who have sinned at the cost of their lives, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar. For they offered them before the Lord, and they became holy. They became set apart for special use. They were reserved for God. So anything that is set apart, reserved for special use by God and for God's purposes only, is referred to as holy, as sanctified, as consecrated. Another example is Jeremiah chapter 1 and verse 5. Speaking of Jeremiah, or to Jeremiah, God says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I sanctified you. I made you holy. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. Jeremiah was called out. He was set apart, right? He's reserved for God's purposes. In other words, he was made holy. He was sanctified. He was consecrated. Now, it's only at this point, it's only after mission that the moral overtones of our English words, holy and sanctification and consecration, come in. We think of being purified, being cleansed, but it's only at this point, after the mission, that comes in. Because if someone is set apart for God's work, if someone is reserved by God, if they are His, then of course they're going to do what God wants. They're going to hate what God hates. They're going to have His moral purity. There is no darkness in Him, right? 1 John 1 and verse 5. So it's only at that point where those moral overtones emerge. This is why we have passages like 1 Peter 1 and verses 14 through 16, where Peter says, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as He who called you is holy, you also shall be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. So we are set apart. We are called out from the world. We are His children, as obedient children, 1 Peter 1 verse 14. So we're different. We're called out of the world. In light of that, we should be holy because He is holy and we are His. So this is the train of thought of sanctification. We're called out for a purpose, and because of that purpose, we are purified. So it doesn't start with the purification. The purification comes after the purpose. So being sanctified isn't just about being clean. That's a side dish at this banquet. The point of it is to be purposeful, missional, intentional people. People who are somewhere or things that are somewhere for a reason, for God's reason. Now that's the kind of person that Jesus was. If you flip back a few pages from John 17 to John 10 and verse 36, I want you to see this is the kind of person that Jesus was while here on earth. This is Jesus speaking. Do you say of Him whom the Father consecrated and sent into the world? Might have missed it. Whom the Father consecrated. Remember that sanctified, holy, consecrated all mean the same basic thing. The Father consecrated Jesus, sent Him into the world. Sent. There's that mission, that purpose. So Jesus was set apart. He was reserved. He was sent into the world on a mission. Now, that's why the next verse is where it is in John 17. That's why verse 18 is where it is. And that's why it says what it says. If you go back to chapter 17, verse 18, read it again with me. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. Now, verses 17 and 18, they're not disconnected. It's not like the thought breaks between them. These apostles were designated for this mission. They were called out of the world. They were set apart by God, consecrated, sanctified, made holy. All of these words have the same meaning. They're surrounding the same concept. They were officially dedicated to that task of verse 18. This past week, I was shopping for a couch to put in my office back there. And I had a specific type of couch that I had in mind, just a specific style. So I went to a store and I was looking for couches that fit this description. Well, in the store, I saw a couple different couches that were pretty close. So this is from a distance. So I walk up to them, and I walk up to the first one. I'm looking at it, and it's a nice couch. It's about what I'm looking for. Then I see a tag on it. Maybe you've had this experience. It's a tag that says it's been purchased by someone else. It's just waiting for them to pick it up. Worst feeling in the world, right? Well, then I go to the other couch that caught my eye, looking at it, and again, it's what I'm looking for. And then there's a tag, and it says that it's been purchased. So someone has great taste because they're purchasing all these couches that are great. And then under this tag, you might appreciate this if you've ever had this experience. Under this tag, there's a note from the store that says that the store is not responsible for any damage that comes to the couch while it's waiting to be picked up. Well, I had a pocket knife on me, and the thought crossed my mind, half a second. If I don't get this couch, nobody gets this couch. But it was very quick. This is part of the sanctifying process. Those thoughts are being pushed away. No, I would never have done that. But I did think about it because it would have been funny for 1 second. But that's what the thought of what Jesus is getting at here. He's praying that the Father would reserve these people, reserve this group for his mission. They're still in the world. He's not physically taking them out of the world. He hasn't taken them home yet, but they're kept for him. And that's why we have this connection between the petition of verses 11 through 16, the petition for protection, and then this petition for purpose, verses 17 through 19. Remember, these are built on the platform of verses 6 through 11, and then coming out of that platform, these petitions are separate, but they're connected. If you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about how all the different parts of this prayer, they can't be pulled apart, because if they are, then the whole prayer just comes apart. They're all interwoven. Well, these two petitions are connected because we are protected. Jesus was praying for the apostles to be protected for their purpose. It wasn't a separate thing. Protect them for this purpose. We were being kept, they were being kept to be sent. Protection for purpose. So that's the connection of these petitions. It's not that they're completely disconnected. It's hard to pick that up when we're reading through that because we're reading through 2,000 years of separation, right? We're missing some of the words and turns of phrases that they used. But that's the point. These petitions are built on that platform and they're connected. And it's all about their mission. It's all about being sent. Now, how would they be consecrated, sanctified, made holy? Well, at least one way is given here in the text. In the truth, which is your word. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. Now, the word in here could be translated by your truth. That seems to be the thought here, that the truth is what sanctifies them. Sanctify them by your truth. Now, notice that this sanctification is a work of the Trinity. Now, I mean by that, let's trace this thought through John especially. John 1 and verse 14, Jesus is referred to as the Word of God, right? The Word became flesh, dwelt among us. So Jesus is the Word. John 14 verse 6, I am the truth. Jesus is also the truth. Sanctify them in your word, or in your truth. Your word is truth. Word, truth. Jesus is word. Jesus is truth. Well, then in John 14 and verse 17, and John 15 verse 26, and John 16 and verse 13, the Holy Spirit is referred to as the Spirit of truth. So the Spirit of truth. And then obviously we have the Word, the Bible, God's Word, through the inspiration of the Spirit. So once again, we have a member of the Godhead, we have truth, we have Word. This is why we have passages like 1 Peter 1 and verse 2, which refers to the sanctification of the Spirit. Because sanctification is very much a tag team Trinitarian process. This is Father, Son, Spirit working together to call us out of the world and sanctify us. And this is also why we have passages like 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 11, where Paul writes, "But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God." So in this sanctifying act, the Father and the Son and the Spirit pull us out of the world. They take us out of the world, and they take the world out of us, and then they send us right back into that same world with a mission, with a purpose. We're sent. That's the sanctification process where it starts. Taken out of the world taken out of us, sent back into the world on a mission. We're reserved for God. Now, at least one of the ways that the Trinity, Father, Son, Spirit, at least one of the ways that they do that is through their words and through our receiving and believing their words. Sanctify them in your truth. Your word is truth. Now that's incredibly interesting because look at verse 14 of John 17. "I have given them your word," there's word again, "and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world." Now, think through this. Notice that this is a picture of the same process described in verse 17. In both verses, they received the word. "I've given them your word. Your word is truth. Sanctify them by your truth." So in both verses, they received the word, and because of that word, they're separated from the world. They're sanctified, set apart, called out of the world. And then also in verse 14, we see the same separation because the world hates them. They're different than the world. They're called out, separated from the world. So it's a picture of the same process, just different sides of the same coin. Because the very same thing that sanctifies them is the same thing that causes the world to hate them. This is a strange part about our sanctification. Our mission is what causes us to be hated. This is Martin Luther, one of the great reformers of the past. He felt this tension in his life. Now, if you know anything about the Protestant Reformation, you probably have heard of Martin Luther. He was one of the major figures in this movement. At this time, the Catholic Church was the overriding body of Christendom in the world. They controlled everything, and it wasn't just spiritual, religious, control inside of the church. It was also governmental. They control. If you believe something different than them, well, you're in big trouble. Well, Martin Luther was in trouble because he believed different things than the Catholic Church. He was a member of the Catholic Church. He was a monk, but he just kept studying his Bible, and he saw so many things that he believed to be the truth that weren't taught by the Catholic Church. So eventually, he was, pricked in his conscience. He fought this for years, and eventually he nails his 95 Theses to the door of, I believe it was the church in Wittenberg, Germany. And that really is the starting point of the Protestant Reformation. Well, at that point, from that point, he was well respected before that in Catholic circles. Well, from that point, he became the enemy in a whole lot of ways, and he endured a tremendous amount of persecution for the rest of his life. And at one particularly dark point in his life, as he's aware of this tension, he's aware of the tension that his belief in the truth, his belief of what he believed to be the truth, is the same thing that's causing him to be hated in the world, even by people who he considers to be his brothers and sisters in Christ. So that tension right there, he's thinking about as he writes this song. And I asked Brad to lead it. I didn't specify. I meant tonight. He led it this morning. And I'm not used to preaching both times, so that was just a lapse in judgment by me. But we sang it this morning, and so the words will probably be familiar to you. Martin Luther wrote these words, "And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God hath willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fell him." And then skipping forward a little bit, that was the third verse. This is the conclusion of the fourth verse. "Let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom is forever." So Martin Luther's perspective is no matter what they do to me, God's truth abides still. It carries on. Now, we would disagree with a whole lot of what Martin Luther taught and believed, but that principle rings true, that sometimes the very thing for which we stand, the truth, what we believe to be the truth, is going to be the very thing for which we're persecuted, the very thing that separates us from the world. We're sanctified by that. And different ways. We're set apart for God, by God, but also by the world and against the world. So that tension, that what chooses us out of the world and what changes us from the world is the same thing that can cause us to be killed by the world. It's something that we haven't experienced much in the West in recent years as Christians, as God's people here on earth. We haven't experienced that much. And I wonder if we are far worse off for it. Maybe that's a topic for a different time. But part of being God's people, part of that mission, integral to it, is that we're hurt by it. We're persecuted for it. That we feel the effects of what we believe to be the truth. That's part of our sanctification. Now, let's move to verse 19. Talk about the model for our sanctification. This is John 17:19. Jesus prays, "And for their sake I consecrate, I sanctify, I make holy myself, that they may also be sanctified in truth." Now, remember, John 10 verse 36, which we referenced earlier, Jesus was already consecrated by the Father. So he's already sanctified. He's already set apart for his mission. So why does he pray here in John 17:19, "I consecrate myself"? He's already done that. He's already been there, done that, and has the t-shirt, all that. Well, the thing is, now at this point, he's staring death in the face, right? We're hours. This is Jesus' final time with his apostles, his disciples on earth, before they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he will be betrayed, taken off, and tried. This is the very end of Jesus' life, the very end of his ministry. So he's staring death in the face. And in that face, he's resolved. He says, "This is what I'm here for. I'm here to do the will of God. That is my mission. That is my purpose." So he's rededicating himself to that purpose. So he is here, he says in verse 19, to sacrifice himself for their sake. In other words, in their place, as a substitution in their place and in ours, right? Now this recalls the imagery of Deuteronomy chapter 15. Verse 19 of Deuteronomy 15, "All the firstborn males that are born of your herd and flock you shall dedicate." Now this is one of those words we've been referencing around sanctification. Sanctification, consecration, making holy, being set apart, being called out, being dedicated. They're dedicated to God. You shall dedicate to the Lord your God. So dedicate the sheep to the Lord your God. Verse 21 of Deuteronomy 15. "But if it has any blemish, if it is lame or blind, or has any serious blemish whatever, you shall not sacrifice it to the Lord your God." Now remember, in John 10 verse 11, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd." So he is the shepherd of the sheep. But then the next phrase is, "I lay down my life for the sheep." So he's picking up the imagery, the Old Testament imagery of this text and others like it. The sheep is given as a sacrifice in place of the people. In this case, the shepherd is given as a sacrifice, as a sheep, in place of his people. And that's why we have texts like 1 Peter 1, verses 18 and 19. "Knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers." Were ransomed. How? "Not with perishable things, such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb, without blemish or spot." That blemish or spot language sound familiar? It's what we just read, Deuteronomy 15. It's picking up on that imagery. He is the shepherd, but he's the shepherd who becomes a sheep to give himself for the sheep. He's that sacrificial lamb, the perfect one. Now, in that sacrifice, he gave us a model, a pattern of what sanctification looks like. That is what it looks like. This is what it looks like to be set apart for God's purposes. Sometimes sanctification is painful. It's scary. It's bloody. But look at what it accomplished. Hebrews 10 and verse 10. "And by that will, by God's will, we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all." It worked. If you're there in John 17, read verse 19 with me again. "And for their sake I consecrate myself, that they also may be sanctified in truth." I give myself up so that they can also be sanctified, so they can have this purpose, this mission. And through that, they'll reach the world. And through that, they'll be transformed in the midst of the world, to be purified and protected in the midst of that world. It worked. Hebrews 10:10. Let's read it again. "We have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all." It worked. He gave himself up for us. He embodied that self-sacrificial love that we're all about. And in doing that, he fulfilled his mission. He accomplished his purpose. And when he did that, he handed that purpose on. John 20, verse 21, right? He hands it on to his apostles. He sends them. And just as we've been sent, that purpose handed down generation to generation. So we have that same mission, that same purpose, that same task, being sanctified, being sent into the world to change it by being different than it. I read this modern day parable this past week, and I'll end with this. But this modern day parable hit me hard. I want to read it to you as well, see if it has some kind of impact on you. It's called The Parable of the Life-Saving Station. It's a bit lengthy, but I think it's worth it to read. There was once a crude little life-saving station on a dangerous seacoast where ships often wreck and injured many people. The building was just a little hut, and there was only one lifeboat, but a few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea, searching day and night tirelessly for the lost without any consideration for their own pleasures and safety. Many lives were saved by this little station, which had such wonderful and loving attitudes toward injured people so that it became very famous. Some who were saved, and others from the surrounding areas, wanted to become associated with the station and give their time, money, and effort for the support of saving lives. So immediately, new boats were purchased and new crews trained. The little life-saving station grew enormously. Some of the more prominent members of the life-saving station were unhappy that the building was so undeveloped and poorly equipped. They felt a more comfortable place should be provided to house those who were saved from the sea. So they replaced the emergency cots with beds and put better furniture in the enlarged building. Now the life-saving station became a popular gathering place for its members, and they decorated it beautifully and furnished it exquisitely because they used it as a kind of social club. Fewer members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do this work. However, the life-saving motif still prevailed in this club's decoration, and there was a liturgical lifeboat in the room where the club initiations were held. About this time, a large ship wrecked just off the coast, and the hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, dirty, and half-drowned people. The beautiful new club was now in chaos. So, the property committee immediately had a shower house built outside the club where victims of shipwrecks could be cleaned up before coming inside. In the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities as being unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal social life of the club. Some members insisted upon life-saving as their primary purpose and pointed out that they were still called a life-saving station. But they were finally voted down and told that if they wanted to save the lives of all the various kinds of people who were shipwrecked in those waters, they could begin their own life-saving station down the coast. They did. Many years went by, and the new station experienced the same changes that had occurred in the old. It evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was founded. History continued to repeat itself. And if you visit that seacoast today, you will find a number of exclusive clubs along that shore. Shipwrecks are frequent in those waters, but most of the people drown. If you were able to pay attention through all of that, you probably saw a parallel in the life of the church. And that's what the parable's about. But that's why Jesus told parables, to awaken the people who were hearing him, who had been followers of God their entire lives. He's speaking to Jews in his ministry. But he's telling these parables to get at them from a different perspective, to wake them up, to say, hey, this is who we're supposed to be. This is what we're supposed to do. And we're not doing it right now. The church has been around for about 2,000 years, right? One of the hardest things to do is to pass off a purpose, generation to generation to generation, especially when it gets to 2,000 years later. If you're a parent, you probably have experienced, to some extent at least, that you can't force your children to believe what you believe. You can't force them to do what you do. You can't force them to act the way that you act. And the same is true in the life of the church. In each generation, we have this incredibly tempting draw to leave our purpose, to leave our mission, to forget why we're here, and to live for ourselves, to exist for ourselves. When that's never been what we're about. That's never been what God's people were about. We don't exist for ourselves. We exist for Him and for them. We exist to be a life-saving station on this earth. And the thing is, human tendency is to live for ourselves, right? So if I don't wake up every day and choose to be on that mission, choose to have that purpose in my life, if I'm not intentional about that, if I'm not purposeful about that, if I'm not missional about that, then it's never going to happen. And it's not that we're going around trying to beat people over the head and show that I'm right, you're wrong. It's about living in such a way that people wonder, what kind of story, because we all base our lives on stories. We all have a story through which we view the world. So it's living in such a way that we cause people to look at us and say, what kind of story is that person living under? Because I want to live under that same story. I want to have that same narrative in my life. Christianity is absolutely true. I believe that with all of my heart. But it's also beautiful and good. And if I'm not showing that with my life, the way I live my life, then I'm missing on the purpose that Jesus has for His church, for His body. It's about going out into the world, living as contrast people in such a way that we draw other people into a relationship with God. We're here on a mission. We have a purpose. And this is probably not a sermon that people are going to respond to publicly, but it's one that I'm responding to privately, and I invite you to as well, because this is a heart thing, and it's something that shows outside of these walls, usually. It's not something that is going to be very obvious in here, but it's going to be very obvious out there when we interact with everybody else in the world. So, I invite you this week to take that purpose, that mission on yourself, and try to live every day more in view of that mission. Now, if you do have something you need to make right publicly tonight, why don't you do that as we stand and as we sing.